Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to install a Gable vent with a powered vent fan to help improve the energy efficiency of my house. This is part of a larger series that I'm doing on energy efficiency to save money, so I will link that in the description below. But without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, to get us started, these vents are meant for vinyl siding, but I have cedar shingles on the side of my house. Now the install is going to be slightly different if you have vinyl siding. I'll try to touch on a couple of those differences as we go through the video, but the general process is still going to be relatively similar. And here's really the biggest difference between the two. If you look at this diagram, here is the outside wall of the house, here is the siding on the face of that, and then here are the studs behind it to which the plywood is fastened. If you have vinyl siding, you're going to remove the siding that surrounds the area, you're going to put this Gable vent on that outside face of the plywood beneath it, and then reinstall your vinyl siding around. But with these cedar shingles that I have, in order to do that, I would literally have to re-side the entire section around this, and I'm already planning to redo my siding a couple years in the future. So what I'm going to do instead is we're going to cut our hole in the plywood sheathing, but instead of mounting it to the outside face, we're going to mount it to the inside face on the inside of the house. Per building code, the 2x4 studs behind that plywood sheathing have to be spaced out every so often, and these vents are wider than that spacing. For that reason, we will have to modify a couple of those supports, but regardless of what type of siding you have, the steps to install these are still going to be pretty similar. And the first step is going to be to clean up the area, including moving anything that you care about out of the way. For example, this Gable vent here is over my garage, which means my cars are directly below it. For that reason, I moved all my vehicles farther away so that I wouldn't get them absolutely covered in sawdust or otherwise drop debris on them. Likewise, you should make sure that you don't have a priceless vase, a small child, or anything else of value directly below you, because that could result in a very bad day. And with that done, the next thing we're going to do is cut the hole for our Gable vent. If you have vinyl siding, you have to remove that siding first to expose the plywood underneath it. And when you're ready, take a couple measurements, make sure you get this nice and centered, and mark out where you're going to cut the hole. So for example, I found where the center line was measuring with a tape measure. Then I used the outer ring of this Gable vent as a template to trace onto the siding. I did use a level to check vertically and horizontally that this thing was lined up. Then I used the Sharpie to mark all of those inside corners once I was happy with the placement. Next, I used my level as a straight edge to connect the lines between those corners, again using that same Sharpie. And finally, I used a 1/2-inch drill bit to drill into each of those corner points to get these holes started. Because what I'm going to do next is cut out this shape using a jigsaw. Those 1/2-inch holes in each corner give me two things. First is a place to put the blade through to get the cut started. And second, it gives me a clear start and end point to target so that I don't cut too far once I get to the next ending point. And in theory, you could use something like a circular saw or a sawzall to do this, but for me, I thought a jigsaw was a little bit more precise and probably a little less sketchy while standing on the top of this ladder. And the other thing I should mention is that if you have shingles like me on the side of your house, you should save the pieces of the shingles that are cut in half, because as you're trimming these, all of the nails are typically in the top part of the shingle, and you're going to be detaching the bottom from the part that's actually secured, meaning those bottom pieces are going to fall off. We're going to have to reattach those later, and if you lose those pieces now, you're going to have to go out and buy new ones and try to paint them to match. But once you've cut between all those corners, go ahead and remove that cutout section, then try to dry fit your vent, see if it goes through the hole, and trim any excess that you need to until your vent fits in. Now that outer ring that I used as a template is going to go over the face of this at the end. That's going to cover the gap between the outer edge of that Gable vent and the outer edge of the shingles. However, if that gap is bigger than this outer ring, you are going to see it even when that final ring is put on. So while you do want to have enough space that you can get the Gable vent in, you don't want to have so much space that you're going to be able to see that gap afterwards. And if you have shingles on your housing like me, that means we're going to have to mount this to the back face of that plywood. And in order to do that, I've got to remove this 2x4 stud, which is going to be blocking my access. So now I've got to go to the back side of that wall on the inside of my house and cut out that 2x4. And when you're cutting the 2x4, it's a good idea to cut off a couple extra inches above and below where you have that cut out in the plywood. And there's really two reasons for this. The first is that that Gable vent has an outer flange, and you want to leave space for that outer flange to make contact with the back plywood, and then you can put a bead of silicone around it and really seal it on there properly. The second reason is we are going to have to reframe this both for structural support and because that's where the powered Gable vent is going to mount, so cutting those couple extra inches off leaves room for those 2x4s. That said, I still did have to notch a portion of this Gable vent just because of all the other things that were in this area, but if you're mounting this to the outside face because you have vinyl siding, you don't have to worry about any of this. So with everything out of the way, go ahead and do a final dry fit. This thing should should sit relatively snug in place. And if not, try taping it in place just to hold it down for now, and then go outside, step back from your house probably 20 to 30 feet, and just verify that everything lines up properly and everything looks straight before you do the final installation, which is gonna be next. Otherwise, if it's even just a little bit crooked, it is going to drive you crazy every time you're approaching your house, and you will notice it. Because I'm mounted on the back wall and these screws are gonna go from the inside out, I wanted to use a smaller screw, so I use these 1/2-inch lath screws because I know those won't go through to the shingles on the other side. If you are nailing or screwing this thing from the outside in, really don't be worried about the length of the screws, just be worried about how secure you make it. Because honestly, with these vinyl gable vents, you don't want them 100% locked into place. You want to leave your fasteners just a little bit loose so this has a little bit of float so it can move around as it heats up or cools down. And now that the gable vent's installed, now we want to waterproof this so that rainwater doesn't get in there and slowly rot out the entire side of your house. Now, if you have vinyl siding and you installed this from the outside of your house, that just pretty much means once it's silicone in place, get the house wrap over the top of it, and then the vinyl siding over the top of that, and you should be all set. But if you're like me and you installed this from the inside wall, that means you have to fill the gap between the outside of the gable vent and the inside of that plywood hole that you cut using a nice healthy bead of silicone. Now, water damage is expensive and silicone is relatively cheap, so for that reason, I went really healthy with it because I really do not want to be repairing water damage down the line. And for me, this is extremely cheap insurance to make sure that I have less projects to handle in the future. But with that said, I bought 2 small bottles of silicone per vent. That was way too much. I would say 1 tube of caulking per vent is probably more than you will need. And if you've never worked with silicone before, it makes an absolute mess. It sticks to everything and it really does not wash off, so I really recommend you wear some clothes that you don't care about as well as some gloves. If you have wood siding like me, now we get to refill all those shingles that we cut off. So this is where I mentioned saving those little cutoffs that probably fell out before. Now we're going to place them back in the same position. I'm going to do a heavy bead of silicone caulk, especially at the top edge of these, but also along most of the back. Press them firmly into place, and honestly, the silicone should give it a pretty strong bond, and I really don't expect it to go anywhere. And in fact, I filmed this more than 3 years ago. I still have not had an issue with a single one of these shingles falling off. And obviously, if you have vinyl siding, you have to put the siding back on. You have to cut the shape into your pieces of vinyl, but once all of your miscellaneous shingles are back in place and you've sufficiently stuffed all these holes with your sticky white liquid, you can now take a step back, give this a little bit of time to dry. I would recommend at least an hour depending on the outside temperature, and then take the final step to installing the gable vent, which is snapping this outer ring in place. And if you did everything properly, everything should look nice, new, and pretty, and make you realize how terrible the rest of your siding is. However, that is not the end of the project, because if you cut any 2x4s on the inside of your house, you are going to have to reinforce those, which leads us nicely into the next section of this project, which is installing the powered vent fan. But if you're not installing one and you just need to reinforce the 2x4s that you cut, in my opinion, the easiest way to do this is basically make a box using the new 2x4s, screw a 2x4 into the top one and then into the 2 adjacent studs, and effectively just create a box around that area. If you are like me and this box is not the same size as the outer dimensions in your vent fan, you just have to get a little bit creative, and that means either extending up the 2x4 on the bottom or adding a second 2x4 to either the top or bottom of your new box, thereby making it a little bit smaller so the vent fan can properly mount. But anyhow, once you have that box frame done, you're going to screw the vent fan to that frame. There should be a couple little brackets that come with it. They're going to screw into that box frame, and then they're going to bolt into the fan housing. The other thing the fan will come with is this little box, which is the thermostat, which provides power after the attic hits a certain temperature. You're going to have to find a mounting place for this, and you want that mounting place to be as high and as close to the peak of the attic as you can get it. But that said, the amount of wire that's provided with it doesn't have a super long reach, so you're probably going to have to make your own bracket that this thing can actually attach to. Fortunately, this is super easy. I just took another scrap piece of 2x4, I screwed it into the side of one of my rafters coming straight down, and then screwed this thermostat box into that. And the final step is going to be running power to this vent fan so you know it actually works and does stuff for you. So look up your local building code. It is slightly different in every area, but for me, I could not have a wire just kind of free dangling across my attic going up to the rafters above. I was required to run a certain length of conduit with an insulator on the end to prevent the wire from cutting on the edge of the conduit. I bent it using a pipe bender, put the insulators in the end, fished the wires through, opened up this thermostat box, and then connected the 2 power wires to the only 2 wires that are within this box. And on the other end of this wire, we need to connect it to power, which is typically either number 1, tapping into an existing power source, or number 2, running the wire down to your electrical box and putting it into the panel. panel. I found a run of wires that went directly from my attic down to my basement next to my chimney, and after I put the wire down through there, I ran it across the ceiling of my attic over to my electrical box. Now obviously check the code for your area, but in my area there has to be wood strapping that goes across so that way no one hangs anything off of these wires, and you're required, at least for my building code, to have these insulated electrical staples that can hold the wire in place every so many inches. Attaching the power into your electrical panel is a very dangerous thing. If you have no electrical experience, I really do not recommend doing this, because honestly, this is one of the very few house projects that if you get it wrong, will almost immediately kill you in a very painful way. So what I would recommend is that even if you ran the wire yourself up to this point, contact an electrician to put this new wire into your panel and install a new breaker. I don't care who you are, the couple $100s that this might cost you is not worth legitimately risking your life over. And quite honestly, that's what I did as well. I hired a professional, it was relatively inexpensive, and now I've got a reliable designated power source going to only the vent fan, which means I can also turn it off in the winter when it's not going to be in use. Bringing us to the final step of this project, checking our work to make sure it actually functions. If you first get up to the attic and the fan is not turned on, don't be alarmed. It could just be that the temperature on your thermostat is too high, and this is also the easiest way to check it, is quickly turn the thermostat all the way down. This should cause the thermostat to trip almost immediately, and your fan should power on accordingly. Obviously, make sure that the fan is clear of any obstacles, including some tools that you forgot to put away, or your fingers, or whatever else you're sticking in there. But if it kicks on, if it's not blowing air towards you, but rather it's pushing it out the side of the vent, congratulations, because that means you have done everything correctly up to this point. You now have a powered vent fan, and you'll probably start saving a significant amount of money on your cooling bills. So at this point, adjust the thermostat to what you want it to be permanently set at. I chose 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Then go ahead and pat yourself on the back, get yourself out of this hot, steamy attic, and enjoy as you spend the next 3 years of your life trying to get all the remaining fiberglass off of your skin. Now, I'll do the full breakdown on how much money this saved me in the other video that I've linked in the description below, but congratulations, because for a few $100s, you have the potential to save 2 to 5 times that amount every year on your cooling bill. So hopefully this helped you guys out. I want to thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.